Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti a questo nuovo appuntamento di Quattro Chiacchiere con il nostro ospite di oggi specialissimo, il dottor Anthony Shaffi, e parleremo di un tema un po' scottante. Ma siamo carnivori? La diretta sarà in inglese e poi quando la posteremo su YouTube ci metteremo i sottotitoli in italiano. Sono emozionata come una bambina la vigilia di Natale, ve lo dico, aspettate che invito Anthony. Ah ragazzi, che meraviglia, ma non so se è ancora arrivato, io comunque lo conto come è nata questa cosa, perché praticamente io ho postato, l'altro giorno mentre camminavo, ho postato questa chiacchierata tra il dottor Shafi e il dottor Paul Mason. E lui mi ha scritto, mi ha detto grazie, e io ho detto prego, grazie a te. E intanto mi è arrivata la richiesta, quindi l'accetto. I'm trying to accept your request, Anthony, it should work. E quindi poi lui mi ha risposto e ha detto, ma ti piacerebbe fare una diretta? E lui ha detto sì, e io ho detto wow, che bello. E niente ragazzi, nei paesi anglosassoni sono così, cioè le persone sono molto più friendly. No, io detesto le traduzioni simultanee perché chi parla inglese perde il doppio del tempo. Cioè, no, preferisco poi mettere i sottotitoli. Allora, vediamo se funziona. Sometimes it doesn't work, Anthony, and this time I'm trying. I've accepted your request many times. Oh,
There you go.
I'm so happy.
Hey,
Ciao, nice to meet you. I'm
hey,
Elena.
yeah, you too. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yeah, very good, thanks.
Okay, good.
And you?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Cool. So you're in Perth, Australia.
That's correct, yes.
Cool. And I'm in the north of Italy in the mountains. And so we
Nice.
have 7 hours difference. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, you're very, very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And so, Anthony, yesterday I saw, because we were talking about the title to give to this live, and I told him, let's use like a more low profile title, like the benefits of carnivore. But then I saw your lecture, Are We
Yeah.
Carnivores? And I say, okay, let's go with this because it was amazing. I learned so much. It was really super interesting. And so I will
Thank you.
start by asking you, you start university pretty young. You were 16?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there was just a program where I was in Seattle that if you took the SATs early, you could just start going to university early. So I took that actually a few years before that, but just because, and just to get it out of the way. I wouldn't have to take it later. And then I was just sort of skipping ahead and taking all the different math and science classes that I had at schedule. And by the time I was going into high school, I'd already taken all the math and science classes. Those were all my favorite classes. So I didn't think it was worth my time to just go and do all the, boring normal classes and forget everything in math and science and then be at the same place when everybody else went to university. And yet I would be at a disadvantage because I would have forgotten everything because it would have been fresh in their head and it would have been 3 years since I took it. So, there's no point in going at an accelerated pace if you don't continue to go at an accelerated pace. So I decided to go to university at that time.
Wow. And you took biology, correct?
I took a lot of classes, but I majored in molecular and cellular biology with a minor in chemistry, yes. And then
And,
went to medical school, postgraduate.
and you had a particular professor, no, during
Mhm.
this period of study. What happened?
Yeah. So I was taking cancer biology at the University of Washington in Seattle, and it was a very, very life-changing experience because we were going through all the different ways that plants defend themselves by being toxic and using chemical defenses to deter animals and insects from eating them, which is something that we know. This is basic botany, this is basic biology, and something that most people understand themselves. If you get lost in the woods and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant. Most of them will cause serious harm or even death. And we were looking at this from a cancer perspective and looking at all the different carcinogens that were in them. And so we learned that there were 136 carcinogens in Brussels sprouts, over 100 in mushrooms, and dozens and dozens and dozens in all the other produce that we ate. And we were very taken aback by this. We were very shocked by that. And I remember everyone was looking around like, okay, this must be a joke. Someone must be in on it, like looking for someone like smirking in the corner. But there wasn't anyone, and it was very confusing for us. And I remember it dawning on me, like, okay, this guy's serious. But I then thought, I was like, well, but vegetables are still good for you, though, right? Like, even though they have all this stuff. And because you're just indoctrinated with this, that vegetables are so good for you. And he must have just, like, it was such perfect timing. I felt like he read my mind, because he just looked at us and he just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables.
Wow.
Plants are trying to kill you. And I was like, right, screw plants. And I just stopped. So that was 23 years ago now, and I just stopped eating plants. And so I went to the store. I wasn't trying to do a carnivore diet. I just didn't want to eat plants because the plants were trying to kill me. So I was just like, right, okay, I'm not going to eat these stupid things. Never liked them anyway. And then I was just looking through all the different things in the grocery store, and everything had plants in it. Everything was plant based. Even if it had meat in it, there was also plants and wheat and corn and rice and all these sorts of things added into it, and obviously produce and fruit as well. So I just defaulted to meat and eggs, because I was like, okay, well, these don't come from plants, so I guess I'll just eat these. And I never thought about it in the context of our evolutionary biological past, where we are animals, and all animals have a specific biologically appropriate diet that if they alter from, it actually causes harm, and you actually get quite sick. And zookeepers know this. Veterinarians should know this, that if you feed animals something that they don't eat in the wild, something they didn't evolve on, they get very, very sick. And this is why you have signs at the zoo and signs in parks that say, don't feed the animals. They get sick if they eat the thing you're eating right now. And I always thought that was very funny, that we had signs telling us to not feed animals the thing that we were eating, that would make them sick. It was just like, okay, well, what's it doing to us? It was making us sick too. And so that's the thing too, is that any zookeeper worth their salt will tell you that if you feed an animal something that it doesn't normally eat, that it gets so-called human diseases, right? Diabetes, heart disease, obesity, cancer, and autoimmune disorders, arthritis, all these sorts of things. And dogs and cats, which are known carnivores, we give them grain and plant-based kibble. And veterinarians are now, certainly in the journals anyway, are talking about the rise and the prevalence of, again, human diseases in the domestic pet population. This is because they're not eating the right thing. They're not eating what they're biologically adapted to eat. And that happens to us as well. So these aren't human diseases, obviously, because they're not restricted to humans, and they're not communicable. So this is not something that's communicable between humans. This is something that we see in any animal that eats outside of its biological necessity. And I mean, you can do this for starvation, you could do this for religious principles, you can do this for all sorts of reasons, but it will cause harm, or at least will be suboptimal as compared to your biologically appropriate diet. I argue that that's a meat-based or meat-exclusive diet, but it is something. There is something that is optimal for the human species, Homo sapiens sapient. And, so people sometimes say, well, everyone's different, some things are good for this person or that person. That's not technically correct. I mean, there's some things that people may be less bad for some person than some other person. But, if you're less susceptible to lead poisoning than I am, that doesn't make lead good for you. It just makes it less bad for you, right? So you can have different people because of their hereditary past, like with agriculture and things like that. We've sort of adapted to some of the toxins that are in these cultivated foods. But people like in Australia or the Native Americans, they don't have these defenses, and so they actually get much more sick. They get these human diseases faster than Europeans do. And in fact, when the explorers were coming here first, they didn't call them human diseases because that was that would have been an absurd concept then. It was called Western diseases, diseases of the West. These Western civilizations who had agriculture would then go to these more, primitive cultures that were just, more hunter-gatherer, really just hunters, and they were just eating meat. And they weren't getting these so-called diseases of the West. And I'm like, oh, that's very strange. And then they started eating the food of the West, and they started getting the diseases of the West. And now we call them human diseases. And now animals are getting human diseases only when eating human food. And that's why you say, don't feed the damn animals. So this is very straightforward cause and effect relationship here, and it's there for anyone to see, really.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And what I loved about, now I have a question before, because in Italy, not many people knows you. A lot of people know you. So this is very good, but you are a neurosurgeon, no? After that university, you went to medical school, correct?
Yeah.
And
Yes,
today
that's
you
right.
are a neurosurgeon.
Well, I'm in residency for neurosurgery. Yeah, so
Okay.
I'm still training to be a neurosurgeon. But yes, yeah,
Okay, you're in
that's the
residency.
field I work in. Yeah,
You will be a neurosurgeon.
yeah,
Yeah, cool. But you also have a practice where you work with people?
yeah. So I have sort of, well, really three jobs. So I have my online presence and podcast that I do. I have my day job, which is also my night job, and my weekend job, which is in neurosurgical residency, and because that's very busy. And then what weekends I'm not working in the hospital, I do a private practice in functional medicine, metabolic health. And so we see people and we try to fix them and help them through diet and lifestyle or supplementation or trying to optimize their life in other ways to try to get them off medication, to try to make them healthy on their own so that they don't need all the medications, they don't need all the prescriptions, they don't need the surgeries like bariatric surgery. We do a lot of things with bariatric medicine is just weight loss medicine. So we work with a lot of people that are struggling to lose weight, and we through diet and lifestyle and coaching and things like that, we help them lose weight. I think a big part of that would be getting people on a carnivore diet, and this can save them from getting quite dangerous bariatric surgery where they have to remove organs and damage others in order to restrict the amount of food that you can eat. You don't have to do that. You can actually eat until you're full. You can eat until you're satiated. If you're eating the right things, your body gives you natural signals. And so, coaching people, telling them, showing them the evidence of this, and then helping them through it has been very rewarding to show people how to take their health back.
Beautiful. And which are when you put people on a carnivore diet, which are the benefits that you see?
Yeah, well, there are quite a lot. So it does depend on what they were eating before, but even just going into a ketogenic diet in general, you're getting rid of carbohydrates. I think carbohydrates disrupt your system in a lot of ways, your metabolism in a lot of ways. They increase insulin. Insulin derails your whole metabolism. So when your insulin goes up, it shuts down a lot of different processes. It actually mess with your hormones, especially with women. It'll block the conversion of testosterone into estrogen in women. And so they'll get too much testosterone, not enough estrogen. They can get PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is the leading cause of infertility in women. And that's caused by hyperinsulinemia, high insulin from eating carbohydrates chronically for years. And it also changes how your hormone signals function. And so it blocks a hormone called leptin, which is secreted from your fat cells, tells your brain that you're satiated, or it tells your brain, it's supposed to tell your brain that you're satiated, but if you block it with insulin, now your brain doesn't know that you have enough fat, that you don't have enough energy, and it thinks that you're starving. And so it tells you to eat and eat and eat, and especially because your blood sugar is going down now because your insulin stays up. So you get the signal that you have zero energy reserves and your blood sugar is dropping. So it sends this panic signal that says, eat now or you're going to die. And so people panic eat 3 times a day. They get hangry. They're like, I have to eat. They get really, really, really aggressive about it. And we think this is normal. How is that normal? We think that we're literally going to die if we don't eat every 3 hours. That doesn't make any sense. We all have, unless you're extremely emaciated, we all have weeks and weeks and weeks of energy in our fat stores, even if you're quite slender. So those will optimize. Your hormones will optimize. Your hunger signals will now actually be reliable. You know, you can actually listen to your body when it says you're hungry, and that when it says you're full, and you'll eat pretty much the exact amount that your body needs without counting calories, without counting macros, just completely intuitively. And even people that have had very difficulties with their weight and with eating and disordered eating, eating disorders, they find that they can actually just eat food and just enjoy it and eat until they're satiated and not have to get wrapped up in counting calories or being having an unhealthy relationship with food. It optimizes your nutrients. I mean, this is our biologically appropriate diet. This has everything we need in the proportion that we need it. The food and the nutrients are perfectly bioavailable. They are the most bioavailable nutrients that exist. And so you get all of these nutrients, all of these vitamins, all of these minerals, and that optimizes all of those in your body. It optimizes your hormones. It optimizes your weight. It optimizes your hunger signals. It optimizes your skin. It gets rid of autoimmune issues. Because the thing is that these human diseases that we talk about, right, being caused by these human foods, which are just completely manufactured. They do not exist in nature. And I mean, even like the foods and crops we cultivate, these things aren't natural. We've cultivated them. So eating these things actually causes harm. And so a lot of these so-called diseases that we're treating now as doctors, as the mainstay of modern medicine, I don't think are actually diseases. I think that they're toxicities. Like the science says, don't feed the animals that you're eating because it will make them sick. Well, it's making you sick too because it's a toxic relationship, a toxicity relationship. And you get rid of those, remove those toxins, and then you remove the toxicity from your body, and your body is able to heal from that. A good example of this is things like diabetes and autoimmune disorders especially. Those just disappear on a carnivore diet. They'll disappear on a lot of other elimination diets as well. There are actually a lot of studies looking at Crohn's and ulcerative colitis where they take an elemental diet, which is it's very processed. It's just it's just like a meal shake sort of thing, but it has all the different nutrients that you need, just all the essential things and nothing else, right?
Okay.
And they found that people who just eat that shake, that's just nutrition, nothing else, that is a better treatment for an acute flare-up of Crohn's than steroids. Right?
Wow.
Steroids is like the best. That's like the big nuclear bomb that you drop on these autoimmune issues. So just these dietary changes, going to an elemental diet, eliminating out all this other stuff is better than steroids. Okay? What does that mean? That means that there was something in the food that you were eating that was causing it, because when you take that out, it just goes away. It goes away. So that's a cause and effect toxicity relationship. And you see this with a lot of other things. You put people on a ketogenic diet. There was a randomized controlled trial looking at people who went on a ketogenic diet, like a high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diet, no carbs, no fiber. And that was the key, because ketogenic, you can have high fiber, but this was a ketogenic diet with no fiber. So this was no carbs, no fiber. And they contrasted that with a control group that were not restricted in their carbs and fiber. So the group that used a ketogenic, no fiber diet kept people in remission with Crohn's on average 51 months. Okay.
Wow.
So, so over 4 years on average, just by getting rid of carbs and fiber, right? Contrast that with the control group that were still eating carbs and fiber. They stayed in remission on average 0 months, which is not a lot of months, right? Especially when you're comparing that to 51. So this is a cause and effect relationship. This is a dose-dependent toxin and toxicity relationship. And so removing these toxins and toxicities, which we heretofore would never have thought were toxins and toxicities, because we've been told they're so good for us, which is why we've been eating more and more and more of them. And that's why we've been getting more and more and more sick. Since they started telling us fat's bad, meat's bad, cholesterol causes heart disease, stop eating it. You actually look at the consumption data in America from 1970 to 2014. They show that we reduce our red meat intake by over 33%, reduce cholesterol and saturated fat by even more than that, nearly 40%, increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, increased high fructose corn syrup, tripled that, over tripled the amount of seed oil consumption as well. And what happened? The obesity rate tripled, heart disease tripled, stroke rate tripled, cancer rates tripled, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even neurodevelopmental delays such as autism, they all increased exponentially. They almost didn't exist before then. Now they're the only things we treat. And they say it's like, and people say, well, it was probably all there. We just didn't notice it. I mean, that is such a lazy thing to do. You didn't look at it. You didn't think about it. You said, it's probably there already. What evidence do you have of that? And you clearly don't know anyone with autism or have a family member with autism, because this is not something you just miss, and someone with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, like those rates have like quintupled, in the last 40 years. Like, I'm sorry, but if you have bloody diarrhea 20 times a day, every day of your life, you are going to notice it. That is going to get picked up by a doctor. I am sorry. We have known about Crohn's for a very long time. It is well described in the literature. Doctors know what to look for. It is taught in first year medical school. So yes, we would have picked this up. So it's very lazy on their part to just say that and make that assumption without any evidence either asked for or provided. So, you look at that consumption data, and people blame it on red meat, they blame it on fat. However, fat and red meat consumption went down by over a third, right? So no matter what else happens, you cannot blame that on red meat. You cannot blame that on fat, because we've reduced both and all these diseases have gone up. And so either way, there's some sort of environmental impact. It's not genetic. Your genetics don't change that fast. They're not going to change in one generation to triple and quintuple diseases. That it will not happen. Anyone who's studied genetics and population genetics knows that's an absurdity. And so this is an environmental impact. There's something has changed in our environment to affect us, and I think that it's the food that we eat.
I love you. Bravo. So now let's get to the point. I totally agree with you. Of course, it's something, probably it's also the lifestyles we have. We don't move our body, the stress we live, sure, of course. But as you said, what we eat changed too much. Let's talk about the big questions. Are we omnivores? Are we vegetarians? Or are we carnivore? And the first question I would like to ask you is, okay, there are animals which have a certain types of digestive tract. And we know that a certain animal with a certain digestive tract is either vegetarian, omnivore, or carnivore. It's not possible that we cannot define who we are based on our digestive tract.
Yeah. So the thing is that there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to these sorts of things. People will sort of cherry pick and say that there's certain characteristics of our digestion that meets, a vegetarian or herbivore sort of digestion, or, even a carnivore. It's hard for people to sort of parse that out. But it comes down to first principles. It comes down to basic function. What can your digestion do? There you go. So, like, there are some characteristics. So we have very low pH. That's something that you typically see in carnivores and even scavengers. So we have stomach pH that's as low as like a vulture's, and that's because our ancestors previously were just scavenging dead bodies before we could figure out tools and tactics and hunt and kill our own big animals, right? Which is why we don't have big teeth, we don't have big claws, but that's because and so we had to figure out some other way. We had to use tools and tactics, and that's why our brains grew, because we had to figure something out. The smarter our ancestors were, the better able they were to survive getting something they weren't physically adapted for, and that's why we live in houses and lions don't, right? We grew our brains instead of our teeth and claws. And so then you look at our small intestine, it's actually much longer than our large intestine, funny enough. And this is sort of the opposite of what you'd see in an herbivore. An herbivore would generally have a very, very long colon. That's where like a lot of this, especially in primates are called hindgut digesters. And they have a very long cecum. It's like 4 feet long. Ours is just a shriveled up little appendix. That's actually a cecum. And in primates that are herbivorous, such as gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutan, things like that, they have a very, very large elongated cecum. That's where all this fiber packs in and breaks down, right? We don't have that organ anymore. We lost that ability. That's because we haven't eaten fiber in millions and millions of years. And so our appendix have just sort of shriveled up. I mean, sure, it has a use. It doesn't have that use. That functionality is gone. So we don't have the ability to break down fiber. All herbivorous animals that eat fibrous plants can break down fiber for nutrition. So it's a matter of functionality. They're saying, oh, we're an herbivore like a cow or a gorilla. Wrong. A cow and a gorilla can break down fiber and gain a lot of nutrition from that. We cannot. But we can get perfect nutrition from meat. It's completely bioavailable. We have all the enzymes, all the chemicals to break down meat and fat from animals and absorb nearly 100% of it. We cannot do that with plants, right? There are so many nutrients, like say spinach. They said, wow, there's so much iron in spinach. Not for you, there isn't. It's bound up in ways that you cannot break down. You don't have the enzymes to separate that out. So you have to take things. People say, well, you eat vitamin C and that will help, extract the iron. It's just like, well, right, because you can't, so this is you have to do something else to it, right? So there's different sorts of practices. We have different ways of processing food and processing plants to extract some of the nutrients, to degrade some of the toxins. What does that mean? That means we don't have the natural ability to do that because we're not naturally adapted to eat plants. So even before you go to like comparative anatomy, it's just a matter of functionality. We don't have the ability to extract adequate nutrition from plants, period, right? Herbivores can. Like that's exactly what they're designed to do, right? And so, and that's the thing too. People think that herbivores, they're eating all this fiber and that's carbs, but they don't actually break down and absorb the carbs because no vertebrate animal can break down fiber. We don't have the mechanisms. So in fact, like cows and gorillas and other herbivores that eat fibrous plants, they actually have a symbiotic relationship with specific bacteria and these big long guts they cultivate certain bacteria that they eat the fiber. And as a byproduct, the actual waste of the bacteria are short chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated. So actually all herbivores that eat fibrous plants, they actually get the majority of their calories from saturated fat. This, bad fat, horrible. No. The animal kingdom runs on saturated fat. And then those bacteria die off and the animal breaks down and absorbs those as protein. So in fact, gorillas and cows and other herbivores, they're actually getting 70 to 80% of their calories from fat and 20 to 30 from protein. So again, they're absorbing fat and protein.
So they are on keto.
We get fat and protein. They are on keto. That's exactly right. So we call a ketogenic diet a fasting diet. It's mimicking fasting. It's tricking your body into thinking that you're starving to death. That's not the case. If I eat a kilo of ribeye, 5,000 calories of ribeye, like I'm not fasting. So you can't call my metabolism a fasting metabolism. The only reason we do that. And
why?
I took biochemistry in my undergraduate degree. This is what we learned. This is a fasting metabolism. This is a fed metabolism. The only reason we call this a fed metabolism, this a fasting metabolism, is by the time that we were able to look at biochemistry at a molecular level, everyone was eating carbohydrates. It was pervasive, right? And so I said, when you eat, it looks like this. And when you stop eating for 24 hours, it looks like this. Failing to recognize the fact that if you eat anything at all besides carbohydrates, it also looks like this, right? So it's really just this so-called fed state is actually a pathological defense mechanism that your body is putting up in defense against hyperglycemia, so high blood sugar. High blood sugar causes physical damage to your body. This is what kills diabetics, just having perpetually high glucose. And that those glucose molecules will glycate other molecules. It's a non-enzymatic binding of those sugar molecules to other molecules that damages them generally irreparably, and you cannot fix them. And so the more you do this, the more your body breaks down from the inside. And so the higher your blood sugar, the more this is damaging. So your body looks at this, panics, and sends out a lot of insulin to try to get this down quickly. And now your insulin's up way too high, and it's causing all sorts of disruptions to your metabolism as well. So that's not a normal state. That's a disease state. That's a hazmat state where your body's desperately trying to fix a bad situation. Our natural state is this ketogenic so-called fasting state. And that's the natural primary metabolic state of basically any animal in the wild. Carnivores and herbivores. Carnivores because they're eating animals with fat, they go for the fat first. They're getting majority fat and protein. And then herbivores because that's what the bacteria in their gut is breaking fiber down into, and they absorb majority fat and protein. So cows are on a ketogenic starvation diet, right? So that's a misnomer. That's been misnamed. There was a study in 1981 looking at wolves because this was at the time when all these exercise physiologists and sports medicine doctors were like, well, you need to eat carbs to burn carbs, you got to carbo load and do all these sorts of things. And then people noticed, they said, wolves, don't carbo load before they chase caribou for 10 hours. So, do they have glycogen? Do they have, blood sugar and things like that? And they found out, yes, they do. And it's rock solid. It doesn't change. It doesn't matter what they're doing. It doesn't matter how long they've been running, how long they've been training, how long they've been fighting or chasing, or if they've been eating and resting. It's here. It's just here. And so that is and we know this biochemically. I mean, I've learned this in biochemistry. When you stop eating carbohydrates, or just really because we look at it in the context of fasting, when you just stop eating altogether, all of your heavy machinery comes to bear. You start making glycogen, muscle glycogen, liver glycogen, blood sugar, ketones. Your body starts making these things in perfect amounts, and you keep replenishing your blood sugar, liver glycogen, muscle glycogen from your fat stores. So you have this near endless supply of energy in your fat stores, and you keep that glycogen level right here. And so you can keep going and keep going and keep going. Whereas if you're carbo loading and you fill up on your glycogen, yeah, you'll have more liver glycogen and muscle glycogen short term, but your insulin is going to be up. And so that's it. It's locked off. It's blocked off your fat stores. So now you can't access them anymore. So you may have more at one time, but you'll run out because your glycogen will be depleting. Mine will stay right here. So it will look like, if you take a biopsy of your liver, you'll find that someone who's carbo loading can get up to 3 times the amount of glycogen in their liver. But for all practical purposes, my glycogen is much higher. Theirs is 3 times higher, but theirs goes down. Mine never goes down. So mine is here forever until my fat stores run out, which you are just not going to do unless you're extremely emaciated. But if you're just running on glycogen and you can't restore it, you've got a couple hours, and that's it. Any sort of marathon runner or high performance sort of endurance athlete can tell you, you keep going. They want to carbo load, because eventually you're gonna hit the wall. You're gonna run out of energy. And then most people stop there. They just run out of energy. They've run out of their glycogen. They've run out of blood sugar, and they just feel awful because they can't replenish their blood sugar and their glycogen. Most people stop there. But some of these guys have learned, which I've done myself when I was in high school and before training. If you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, you can break through the wall, get your second wind, get your runner's high, and you just feel amazing, and you can just go and go and go. Well, what that is that's forcing your system to start producing or accessing your fat stores so you don't just die, right? And so, and then all of a sudden you just feel amazing. You have all this energy. You can just go and you can run and do everything. You can just go and go and go because now you've accessed your fat stores. Well, I live in my second wind. I am always through the wall. I am always in my runner's high. When I start working out, I produce exactly the amount of energy that I need to work out, so I feel better as I go. So I want to work out. It's a positive feedback. The harder I work, the more energy I produce, the better I feel, the harder I want to work. And so this is very conducive to a very healthy lifestyle. And that is just your natural metabolic state that you're supposed to be in. And you mentioned before about maybe we're more sedentary and maybe we have other factors involved, and that may be true. But there was another study in the 1980s where they looked at the Maasai warriors in Africa, East Africa, and these guys, I mean, they looked like Olympic athletes. They were just so lean and strong, and they could just go forever. When they were like hunting, they were just loping along, just running, and they were up at altitude, and they could just go for days. They were very fit people, and so they thought, well, this must be because they're just exercising so much. They're just exercising so much, and that's why they're so lean and strong and powerful and have all this endurance. And so they just followed them around, and they just saw what they did, and they calculated it. And they found that they only exerted themselves 1.6 times more than the average American. Which is like everyone around the world will say, oh, they're just a bunch of lazy couch potatoes. The Maasai don't work out much more, but they're eating what they're supposed to eat. They're eating meat, they're drinking milk, they're drinking blood, and they're drinking raw milk. Not everyone can deal with milk, but the Maasai can, and they drink blood, and they drink milk, and they also eat meat. The Genghis Khan, the Mongol horde, they just ate horse meat, drank horse blood. They were on average 6'4". They conquered the largest contiguous empire that's ever existed. They ruled that for hundreds of years until there was like some sort of cataclysm that sort of threw up a bunch of dust in the sky for several years, killed off a lot of the grasslands, which the horses relied on. And that's where actually the start of the Russian empires came over, because they took over this big, huge chunk of land that had formerly been the Mongol Empire. So you learned that in college. I took Russian history and history of Russian empires just randomly, and we learned that. But
wow.
But that's the thing. And so this is something that is extremely healthy. And you see these populations where they're eating a lot of meat, and in the fossil record, these mammoth hunters that just ate a bunch of mammoths during the Ice Age, the skeletons were on average 6'2" to 6'4". The average height of a population denotes the average health of a population. The Native Americans, when they were just eating buffalo, some of these guys were pushing 7 feet tall, and they would come. There was a chronicled meeting between some of the Native Americans and then President Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson was a tall guy. He was one of the taller presidents. He was 6'2", 6'3", something like that. And he said that these guys were absolute giants. He said they were huge. They were just absolute massive people. These guys were nearly 7 feet tall, and they're just eating meat, and that's just what they did. And so it's very, very healthy. It's very, very good for you to eat like that. The other thing is, so we talk about being sedentary, and I remember thinking when I was a kid, I looked around at all the animals, and all these animals, I loved nature videos and seeing nature, things like that. And mostly like the lions and, fighting hyenas and things like that. I don't know, I liked that sort of thing. But I remember like looking at this, and all these animals are just so muscular, so strong. And as a kid, as a young boy, like I really aspired to be like a strong, muscular man. I just thought that I wanted to do that when I grew up. I wanted to work out. I wanted to play sports. I wanted to be successful at both. And so I was looking at this and I'm like, wow, I really like that. And like these animals are just so ripped, they're so powerful, they're so strong and muscular. And then just look at people, and we're just not, and but we dominated the world, and it was very confusing to me. I was like, how do we become the most dominant animal in the world? If we're just so physically inferior to these things. And I was just like, why are we the only squishy animal on Earth? Like we're all just out of shape and not really in keeping with what we would see the physicality of nature. And I remember thinking that, and some people just sort of give an offhand remark like, oh, well, they're just always running around, they're always active, they're always outside running around and exercising, so it's just exercise, right? But that doesn't explain animals in the zoo. Animals in the zoo live in a pen the size of this room, and they never leave. They're not running laps. They're not on a treadmill. They're not hitting the gym, but they're ripped. They look like they're on steroids, you know? And so, you know, like that's, and why is that? Because they're eating what they're supposed to eat. If they're eating what they're supposed to eat. And again, you start feeding them, you know, grain, kibble, and things like that, they will get fat. They will get sick. They will get diseases. And so it's only when they're eating properly. So it's not necessarily the exercise. Exercise is great. You'll stimulate your muscles. You stimulate your life. You will be healthier if you exercise. There's just a ton of evidence that shows that. But I think that the diet is the most important thing, you know, as evidenced by the Maasai and zoo animals. You're eating what your biology dictates, and your body's going to be healthy and happy and strong.
Anthony, can you please explain us why on keto the mitochondria are more numerous and more effective, please? Because I think
Yeah.
this is also another, because I'm trying to, well, one of my life purpose is to understand which is the appropriate diet of human being, no? And so I try to look at the basis, no? Like biochemistry, so which type of fuel can our body use, which one is more efficient. And then I stumble on information like this, that in our body we have more mitochondria and they're more effective when we are on keto.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's pretty straightforward that that's the way to go.
Yeah. And it's more than that too. Like there are a lot of studies that show that if you're fasting, right? There's a lot of studies that show benefits of fasting. So we go, wow, fasting is so good for you. Well, really what it is being in that metabolic state that we're supposed to be in is what's good for us. And so when you're out of that metabolic system and the insulin is up and your body is just sort of stuffed with carbohydrates and things like that, it actually disrupts your cellular metabolism as well. And so it can slow it down. When you're fasting, there's a lot of studies looking at fasting and how people, when they're fasting, they trigger something called autophagy or autophagy, where you will sort of eat these older cells that aren't really working too well, but they'll also recycle the organelles within a cell. And so you'll have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of little organelles or mitochondria in your cell, in each cell. And some of those get old and worn out, right? Just like your red blood cells, they last about 3 months and they get old and worn out and your body recycles them, right? This needs to happen with your other cells as well. They get oxidative stress, they get glycation injuries, and they eventually need to get replaced. And so I don't know the mechanism, but for some reason, when your insulin is high and your glucose is high and you're not in and you're in the fed state, so-called fed state, the misnamed fed state, this shuts that down. It doesn't allow your body to go through this normal housekeeping of recycling your organelles, recycling your cells, and so it blocks the actions of your stem cells as well. So people say when you're fasting, it triggers your stem cells to make new, younger cell lines. You replace these older cells, these older organelles. And mitochondria does this as well. So you have mitophagy, which is recycling of the mitochondria, and you get mitogenesis, where you actually make more mitochondria that stimulates more of them. And it's probably they don't break down and die as fast either, so they can actually duplicate. So there's studies showing that if you go on a ketogenic diet, after a few months, you'll have 4 times the amount of mitochondria, and they will be 4 times as effective. So this is a huge, huge, huge boost to your cells. And it's not just the mitochondria.
Wow.
It's all the organs. It's all the different cells. It's the stem cells as well. And so we know this with fasting, but we've done this with ketogenic diet, fasting mimicking diet, because people get freaked out when you say ketogenic, ketosis. So they sort of call it, they call it by different names, call it a fasting mimicking diet. Well, you don't want to fast all that time. So what about a fasting mimicking diet? What about a diet that mimics fasting? Well, really, that's the other way around. Fasting is mimicking you being on a proper diet and not eating something stupid that disrupts your body and breaks down your biochemistry. So that is something that is more evidence that this is our natural state of being. This is our natural metabolic state, because this is where all these massive benefits come in. So, like, why would that be a temporary starvation state? Every now and then we just need to starve ourselves to snap ourselves. Why would that be? That doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't our primary state be the state where things are just running amazing all the time, and recycling and running perfectly? There's a ton of evidence on that, and different doctors and researchers, such as Professor Chris Palmer from Harvard. He's showing now that you can actually reverse serious psychiatric diseases such as schizophrenia, bipolar, OCD, major depression, ADHD, even autism. That you can actually fix these things, or at least significantly improve them, by going on a ketogenic diet and eating more meat. And this changes, in a very fundamental way, the expression and efficacy of your cells and your mitochondria in particular. And this is if people are interested more, they should read his book called Brain Energy. I have a podcast with him coming out this week as well, that people can watch. But his book is just a masterclass on how mitochondria work and how they function. Brain energy, yeah, and how their dysfunction can cause major disease, because they're very, very important. They don't just sit there just making ATP, making energy. They actually move around your cell like little worker bees, and they actually use the different organelles in your cell like machines. They say, okay, we need to do this. I'm going to run to this machine. I'm going to run to this machine. I'm going to run to this machine. You've got thousands, tens of thousands of these things. And if they're going slower because, they're broken down and old, they're going to get there a little late. They're not able to produce the amount of energy they need, ATP. They're going to get a late response that's slightly inadequate. You look at this from thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of mitochondria in each neuron. And we have anywhere from 400 billion to 2 trillion neurons. Okay? That compounds very quickly. If your mitochondria aren't working right, your neurons aren't working right, your brain's not working right, things start breaking down. So he's found that he can actually reverse schizophrenia and get people off medication by putting them on a ketogenic diet. Like, that's it.
Wow.
And other sort of metabolic stressors, right? So fixing their metabolic health, basically, right? So doing other things as well, but diet is a very, very, very major part of that. And so getting people off serious psychiatric medication, where they're, he talks about one example. This guy was a paranoid schizophrenic. He has schizoaffective disorder, which is a very serious type of schizophrenia. And he was saying he had these paranoid delusions that all these major corporations were out to get him, and the governments were spying on him, and he had all these conspiracy theories and ideas. And he wanted to lose weight. He was quite overweight, and he sort of thought to himself, well, I'm middle aged and I don't have a girlfriend. They're not gonna. So I want to lose weight so I can try and get a girlfriend. So can you help me with that? So they talked about it, and he ended up helping him go on a ketogenic diet to help him lose weight. After a few months of this, he sort of came in and he said, how I was saying that I had all these thought these people were following me and trying to track me and all these sorts of things. And Professor Palmer was like, yeah, that's been sort of everything we've talked about for the last 10 years. Yeah, that's it. He's just like, I don't see why they would. That just seems a bit crazy. Like, why would they do that? I don't think that's true. I don't think that they would do that. That doesn't make any sense. And, and I think that maybe I was just imagining it. And maybe people were right. Maybe I do just have schizophrenia.
Wow.
And very insightful, which is, a hallmark of sanity, is that you have insight into these problems. And so this guy, it should change his life. And not only did he lose a bunch of weight, but he reversed his very serious psychiatric disorder. And so this is not an isolated case. This is not anecdotal. He's actually running, large scale studies on this. And there are papers going back to the 2000s showing that, or at least arguing, that schizophrenia and these psychiatric disorders are actually mitochondrial metabolic disorders. All the way back like 2008, I saw a paper that discussed that.
Wow.
So this isn't new. It's just not that well known. So we really need to bring this to the light.
And also, I saw that you had a talk with Thomas Seyfried, which, in my
Yeah,
opinion, should be awarded with a Nobel Prize for the work he did.
I think so too.
He's amazing. He's really amazing.
Absolutely.
And also, there, the problem in cancer, the real problem in the majority of cancer is mitochondria. So again, we go back to
Yeah.
this problem of energy production. But the problem is, like last week, one of my clients, she wrote me and she told me, I feel great on keto, but I wonder why when I eat glucose, the body burns the, no, when I eat some bread, the body uses the glucose because it's his favorite energy. No, it's exactly the contrary, because it's a poison and it
Mhm.
has to get rid of it, correct?
Yeah, to get rid of it. Yeah. And so a way of getting that out of your bloodstream is by forcing it into your cells, but it's not putting it where it exactly needs to go. It's just getting it out of there as quickly as possible. So this is why this is what we do to cows to fatten them up.
Mm-hmm.
Does no one realize that? You put them in a feedlot and they're eating a bunch of grains, right? They're eating a bunch of carbohydrates and they gain more fat because this is just stuffing that energy into your fat and also into your muscles. You get intramuscular fat. So that marbling, right? That marbling that we like in a steak, that's happening to your muscles as well. Okay? So
Mm-hmm.
that's not healthy. That's not depositing healthy lean muscle into your body. That's putting in fat and glycogen and all these sorts of things to get the hell out of there. Um, no, you're like there are some tissues that like glucose and glycogen, like your muscles, right? Fine, but we make glucose and glycogen in exacting amounts. You don't need to eat it, right? Then when other tissues like your brain actually prefer ketones.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something everyone knows. But I mean, I learned that, in biochemistry 23 years ago, and that is to say your brain will always run on ketones. Anytime you have ketones in your body, which is basically always, your brain will take those in. But when you have high blood sugar and you have therefore high insulin, that suppresses lipolysis and proteolysis. So that blocks your body's ability to make ketones, right? So you don't have much ketones in there. You have a lower level of ketones, but your brain's always running on ketones. Then when you have more ketones, and you can actually do this, we have high insulin, but you just take like a shot of, ketone esters and things like that. Your ketone level goes up to a certain level. Even if you have super high glucose, your brain kicks out all the glucose and only runs exclusively on ketones. There are parts of your brain that need glucose. The majority of it prefer ketones, and that is a preference. There's high, abundant amount of glucose. Then you reach a threshold of ketones, which are less than the glucose, and your body just runs on the ketones. So that's showing a preference. And in fact, this confers a lot of benefits as well. I think this is certainly going to benefit kids and everybody. It's going to make your brain work better. It's your preferred energy for your brain. Ketones cross the blood-brain barrier and they reconstitute into fatty acids, which are what your brain is made out of, right? And so it helps build and develop your brain. So this is very important, especially for kids. Like babies, even though they're drinking a lot of milk and milk has lactose, they're always in a state of ketosis.
Mm-hmm.
And their brains are growing rapidly. Their nervous system is growing rapidly. And you stop that, it severely limits the potential of their brain and body to develop their neurological system properly, as evidenced by the fact that before the agricultural revolution, the average adult male brain size was 11% larger than it is now, right? That's environmental. That's
That's
that's not
scary.
genetic.
That's
You know,
scary.
yeah. Well, our brain size was going up exponentially. It's the fastest growth in brain size that's ever been seen in nature. And then you get up to the agricultural revolution and it's straight down, right? So it's going up and then bam. That doesn't happen normally. That something happened there. Something bad happened there, right? So the good news is that you can undo that. Is that you can start feeding yourself and feeding your kids fat and ketones and get rid of carbohydrates and sugars, obviously alcohol and things like that. And their brains, your brain, will develop and work better. Their brains will develop better and grow bigger and grow more advanced with better and more robust and more numerous neural connections. And they will work better. People with Alzheimer's, there was a study that showed that putting people on a high-fat ketogenic diet was a better treatment for full-blown Alzheimer's than every medication ever trialed for Alzheimer's, right? So that's not a small thing.
That's amazing.
And yeah, well, people are now calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, right? Because it has a lot of similar metabolic similarities to type 2 diabetes. Well, you get peripheral insulin resistance, where you have to get more and more insulin to force this stuff in there. Your blood sugar is going higher and higher because your body can't utilize it as well. And your brain is a tissue. And so you get this resistance to getting getting your blood sugar into your brain as well. And you start getting less and less energy into your brain. You're not getting as many ketones. You're not getting the substrates to rebuild and maintain the physical structures of your brain. Your insulin's high. You have this metabolism that's screwed up. It's not allowing your stem cells to be active. It's not allowing the cells to go through autophagy, mitophagy, and recycle all the cells and organelles within them. Your brain decays. Your body decays, and we get things like Alzheimer's. You put someone with Alzheimer's on a ketogenic diet, now you have enough ketones and the brain just turns on. Like literally within 24 hours of stopping eating carbs, your family member who has Alzheimer's will be a different person. It will be like they've aged in reverse by a decade, and their brain will work, It's absolutely it's probably one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see, because you're giving someone their humanity back. They can't function, they can't remember, they're institutionalized and they're just confused, and it's so sad to see. And then all of a sudden they're back to something towards their old self, where they can remember, they can function, they know what's going on more. They can actually get their independence back. There are actually people leaving the nursing home, going back home from changing their diet to a high-fat ketogenic diet. That's amazing. That's not supposed to happen. That's supposed to just get worse until you die. And that's depressing. But it doesn't have to be that way.
Do you really think we can live 120 years?
Yeah, we're designed to, So, I learned that in my genetics class, again, like 23 years ago, 25 years ago. We are genetically, chromosomally, designed to live out, because we have telomeres on the end of your DNA, and they sort of split off, and you can replicate a certain amount of time. And you can tell by your telomeres what your metabolic age is, how much longer you're probably going to live. And they were looking at this, and they were like, yeah, we are actually designed to live 120 years. And so what does that mean? That means if you don't mess up, then you should just, without doing anything special, just make it to 120 years. Right? So why are we dying in our 60s and 70s? Why are we degrading and breaking down in our 30s and 40s and getting sick and fat and decrepit, and then just for the last couple of decades of our life just getting worse and worse until we die? What animal does that? You're going to get eaten by something if you're doing that in the wild. Animals in the wild, if they don't get eaten by something, they basically just go and go and go to a high level, and then they just drop dead. And because they're very healthy and they're very active, and then it just goes like, yep, this is all I've got. And they just they're not getting massive coronaries, they're not they're blowing a pupil, getting a stroke. It's just like their bodies just come to the end, and they just break down and they die. But they've been hunting and living and exercising and doing all these sorts of things all the way up until the end. They're very active older adults, and we used to have that too. I always ask people this: If they're younger, I say, talk to your grandparents, talk to some of the older generation. I talk to my parents and I'll ask you, do you remember your grandparents as a young girl? Were they in a nursing home? Did they have Alzheimer's? Did they lose all their faculties? Most people will say no. It still happened, but it was not in the rates that it is now. Now we've got nursing homes and retirement homes and hospice home all over
We
the place.
we never had, like in Italy, we never had nursing home before.
Yeah,
Like the grandparents would stay at home with their family or in their own home. And yes, of course, they were growing old, but on average, we didn't have the problem we have today and as early as we have today.
yeah,
Yesterday, I spoke with one of my customer, and her dad, he died at 40 something of Alzheimer.
right. Jesus.
It's not normal. Exactly.
No.
I have a question for you, which is very important because in Italy, this belief is still very strong. Does meat cause cancer?
No. So is there anything, so what is meat, right? You're meat. I'm
Yeah,
meat. We're
yeah.
made out of meat. So is there something in my bicep here that's going to cause cancer to my bicep? What about meat is going to cause cancer? There's all these associative sort of things. These are epidemiological studies. Well, this is all based on very poor epidemiological studies that were cherry picked. There's a lot of Seventh-day Adventists who are religiously in favor of a vegetarian or vegan diet, and they have been since the 1800s. They found that people who ate more meat, they were more virile, they were more sexually active. They thought this was a sin, that lust was a sin, and so people having sex and masturbating, obviously this was very sinful. And they noticed that people who ate meat would do this more often. And if you just ate a bunch of plants and didn't eat meat, this would suppress that. And like, oh, I don't have these feelings anymore. Oh, I'm so good and pious. Really, what you're doing is destroying your hormonal health, and your
You're
body's just
being a
so unhealthy.
human. I mean, this is being a human. They
Well, yeah.
destroy
Well, I mean,
being
what
a human.
literally, what is the meaning of life? To
Reproduction.
procreate and to have kids and make a new generation. Like that is literally the meaning of life from single cell organisms all the way up to blue whale, and sequoia trees. That is the meaning of life, to have kids and to procreate. That's, I mean, maybe not from a religious standpoint, but actually a lot of religions say, go forth and multiply. So this is a major, 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 this is the meaning of life, to procreate. And so when you are healthy, you will have that instinct to procreate. That is normal. That is healthy. You can make it unhealthy and abuse that and hurt yourself and others by doing things in a way that you shouldn't. But the instinct to procreate is very healthy. It
Yeah.
is very normal. And so suppressing that is obviously not going to be a good thing. But they thought that was a good idea because this made you less lustful. Therefore, meat must be evil. I mean, literally. I mean, this is actually what these people thought. This is where Kellogg's cereal comes in. Dr. Kellogg from Kellogg's cereal. He was a Seventh-day Adventist. He was out of his mind, but he was very influential. He was a very influential doctor. There were a lot of people that looked up to him. I think he was a congressman at one point as well, and he pushed through all these things like Kellogg's cereal, obviously, but that was an attempt to suppress people's health and hormones. Like literally, he just wanted to get this in there and get people eating this stuff so that they would have sex less. Like this guy was just crazy. Like, what do you care so much about what everyone else is doing? He also got it pushed through to make the official sort of medical recommendations of the U.S. government that you should circumcise your boys because this confers some sort of health benefit that he said, which is completely made up. It does not confer a health benefit. If you practice normal hygiene, there's no difference between the two. In fact, they can actually cause harm for other reasons if you get circumcised. His reason for doing that was to make it harder for people to have sex and to masturbate. And this guy was just obsessed with other people's sex life.
Yeah, yeah.
And, and so a lot of these things have carried on. So the Seventh-day Adventist Church has actually been the original founders, I think, of like the 1910s. They helped found some institutes of nutrition to study and teach nutritional sciences. to teach people that they should be eating a plant-based diet. So all of the literature is biased from them. And they have a lot of these things. Loma Linda, California is a medical center there. They put out a lot of really garbage studies that are extremely biased towards this Seventh-day Adventist ideology. And so behind all of these studies, you will generally find someone from Loma Linda, from the Seventh-day Adventist Church as well, or someone who's been influenced by them, but a lot of it's coming directly from them. So those studies, like there was one that showed like an 18% increased prevalence in colon cancer rates if you're eating red meat. Okay. When you're looking at epidemiological studies, you're literally looking at someone like a survey, a food survey. So how much of this did you eat? What did you do here? What did you do there? That's nonsense. Like that is such soft science, it's junk science. And they're trying to extrapolate a lot of meaning from that. You can do it well. These are not done well. But because there's so much background noise, there's so many confounding factors, there's so many inherent mistakes that you can make with just your own memory of what you've eaten and what you've done, and your subjective sort of, interpretation of it, that if you don't have something that's more than 200%, increased correlation, like it's just background noise. You just don't even look at it. So this is 18%. So it doesn't even meet that threshold, right? But people took that and go, oh, look, it increases your chances of getting colon cancer. I'm like, no, it doesn't. And then people have since corrected for a lot of these confounding factors, done a better epidemiological study, found, actually, there's no correlation between red meat or any meat and colon, even processed meat. And what is processed meat processed with? Spices and sugar, plants. So you're adding in poison plants. Yeah, or they do natural ones with celery powder, because celery has way more nitrates than the nitrates you add into bacon, right? We make about 400 times the amount of nitrates in our saliva every day. So there's a lot of things that are just not what they seem. And the University of Washington in Seattle, where I went and took that cancer biology class, they actually just published a major literature review this year looking at all these so-called studies, which are really just propaganda pieces, saying that unprocessed red meat was a cancer risk and a health risk. And they found these are extremely poor evidence. They're very lazy studies and weak evidence. Yeah. And so it's just that they excoriate this. I mean, these are just garbage. And the only people that use these things are the ones who are pushing an agenda, or the ones who have never actually read the studies and know how to interpret them, or just actually don't understand that, that just because a paper concludes something doesn't actually mean that it's true. There's a lot of papers that conclude something that have no basis to conclude. You look at the study, you read the study, and you say, yeah, that didn't even come close to showing what you said it did. I've read so many studies, even from the WHO and other places. Especially the WHO, they've got a lot of biases. They do a lot of good work as well, but there are some significant biases that they have. And you read these studies, and you're like, absolutely not. That is not what that showed. You did not show that. You showed the opposite in some cases.
John Ioannidis, I think he's in Stanford. He published a paper where he said that 99% of the math in all the scientific study is incorrect. So
wow, yeah,
it's crazy.
And you manipulate data, you manipulate facts, you manipulate statistics. Like Mark Twain said, there are three kinds of lies. There are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics. And that's how you manipulate these things. And even saying that statistic, it increases, red meat causes cancer. How? But see the big jump there? You have an 18% increased correlation in one study, and now all of a sudden people are saying red meat causes cancer. That's a massive leap.
It's disgusting, because now everybody now, the majority of people, the people that listen to what they are told, that do not study, which is the majority of people, they believe that the most nutritious food on the planet are harmful. I mean, this is crazy. Like eggs,
Mm.
fats, meat, they all believe it's harmful, which is
Yeah,
exactly the contrary. I mean, this is brainwashing people.
yeah, it is. Um, it's and there can be a lot of different reasons. I mean, historically there were, the Seventh Day Adventists, then the different industries, that make trillions. The sugar industry alone makes 1.3 trillion US dollars a year just selling sugar, right? And so things like Nestle, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, these things are multi-trillion dollar industries, you know, and
Yeah, and
so
and
they
then we
have
should
an
mention
interest in
also
that.
the pharma industry, because when you eat crap,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
your body get ill, and then you need medicine. Then there is that industry is one of the biggest industry on the planet. So, yeah, there's too much interest, and I believe that we really like take responsibility of our own health, because
Yeah.
it doesn't seem that the rest of the people, except for a very small minority, cares about it. I wanted to ask you
Well,
something,
I
Anthony.
was going to say one thing real
Yeah,
quick. Like,
sure.
you know, guess who's like heavily invested in the pharmaceutical industry?
The food
The food
industry.
industry. Yeah, exactly. They're heavily invested in each other. All
Yeah,
right. This is not a healthy relationship.
no.
And so, I don't know if they're trying to get us sick so that they can sell us medicine. I have no idea. But they are making a lot of money. They're making multi-trillions of dollars a year just in the US. We're spending $2.4 trillion dollars a year just treating the effects of diabetes, just diabetes, right? And we're spending $1.3 trillion dollars a year on sugar and all the rest of it. So I mean, this is a major cash cow as well. And so there are major industries involved trying to cut this down. That's why they put out industry research. Coca-Cola, just Coca-Cola, puts out 11 times more funding for nutritional research than the NIH, right? So
This is
what do you think
nonsense.
the study? Oh my God, there's so many studies. People say that all the time. There's just so many studies that show that meat's bad for you. So many studies that show that cholesterol is bad for you. So many studies that show that plants are good for you. Yeah, who paid for them? Coca-Cola. Pretty sure I don't give a crap what their study says. And a lot of these things, they've actually hidden the fact that they pay for them, hidden the fact that they've paid off the researchers looking at it. University of California, San Francisco Medical School published in 2016 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, which is one of the top medical journals in the world, published actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in like the 50s and 60s detailing how they were paying off different professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar, or at least thought to be, because there were studies coming out saying that, hey, we think that cholesterol, or we think that sugar is a contributor to heart disease, because as refined processed sugar consumption increased in every country, it perfectly tracked the rise in heart disease as well. And so they put out industry opposition research to try to muddy the waters, and they started throwing the blame on cholesterol. And we have documentation of this. This is not up for debate. This is a historical fact. We know what they got paid. We have their contracts. We know that 3 Harvard professors were on the payroll of the sugar companies. We know that Ansel Keys was on the payroll of these sugar companies. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA while on the payroll of these sugar companies. And he was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration that cholesterol causes heart disease, saturated fat increases cholesterol, stop eating both. He was paid to say that. You have to throw it all out. It is all garbage. It is all a lie.
It's disgusting.
It is. These people should be shot, and I'm not being facetious.
I,
This is
this is
this is
exactly what I believe. Like,
well,
dead.
they have been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of millions of people prematurely and suffering for decades of each of those lives, right? You're talking billions of human years of suffering and early death because of these pricks. Like I mean, Hitler never did anything that bad. and like, we have these Nuremberg trials. Like, why aren't we having similar trials for this? These people knowingly put this stuff out there. Like the tobacco companies, they knowingly lied for decades about how harmful and addictive smoking was. That killed so many people that did not need to die. Why aren't they in jail? Why aren't they, standing in front of a sunny wall with a blindfold and a cigarette? You know, like they should be. These people are evil.
Yes.
They have completely destroyed the health of humanity.
Yeah.
And for what? 30 pieces of
For
silver? I don't
money.
even think they
Yeah.
got that much. Like what the contract was for these pricks at Harvard? These are Harvard, right? So these are the top tier guys. What were they worth? $6,500. That's it. $55,000 US in today's valuation. That's it. That's what their souls were worth. That's it. We have their contracts. This is not up for debate. This is an historical fact, right? And so, it's absolutely appalling.
Mhm.
And it's only a shame that most of these guys have since passed away so that we can't kill them, basically.
I love you. Let's speak about something positive now. So, meat. Allora, because in this carnivore world, there are people who have different ideas, no? So, for
Yeah.
example, there are people who says eating fruit is okay, fruit and honey is okay. There are other people who say no, it's not okay. What do you think? Which is your position?
I think that just eating meat and just drinking water is definitely the best way to go. People want to do something else and that works with their lifestyle, they can. If you want it, a lot of people drink coffee still. I don't because I feel better when I don't drink coffee. I don't have as much inflammation. I don't get sore after I work out. When I drink coffee, I do. And so I choose not to do that. And I just tell people my experiences and just relay to them that coffee, like every other plant, is going to have defense chemicals in them that your body's going to have to detoxify and will cause disruptions and will likely make you feel a bit worse. And a lot of people, when they stop drinking coffee, they feel better. And so, it's all a matter of trial and error, see how people feel. I encourage people just to try meat and water for at least 30 days and just to see what it's like. And then if you want to sort of reintroduce coffee or something else and it adds benefit to your life and you don't mind the distractions from your health, go for it, Or if you want to smoke, you want to drink, you want to eat pizza and do drugs. I honestly don't care what people do with their own lives. I'm all for adults being able to choose what they do with their own life.
Freedom.
But I want them to have the evidence. I want them to have the information. If someone wants to eat, pizza and smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol or whatever, and they know that that's harmful, and they just say, "Yeah, I don't care." Okay, that's your business, But there was a time where doctors recommended people smoke. There was a time that people said drinking beer and Guinness was good for pregnancy, right?
Wow.
So that's bad, right? And now we're in a time where people are saying that these plants that have known biotoxins, there are nearly 1 million different biotoxins that plants use to kill and disable animals from eating them. There's a video on YouTube from Cambridge University in the UK called Cambridge Ideas and what's it called? Don't Eat the Plants. And the professor of botany and the director of the botanical gardens at Cambridge starts going on talking about all these different toxins and chemicals and ways that plants defend themselves. And he back in 2011 said, okay, so what do you eat? I guess you could eat some fruit, you could be a frugivore, but if you want to eat real food with real nutrients and doesn't have all these nasty chemicals in it, he just says, become a carnivore. He starts eating chicken, like right there, and he's just like staring at the camera, like daring people to say something. This guy is one of the world's experts on plants and plant toxins, and he is telling you plants are toxic. This is a fact. The only reason that people don't really notice this is because botany is boring and no one studies it. Like that is it. Even biology, even people getting a biology degree don't study botany. They're like, oh my God, I'm not doing that. Plants? Like, no, thank you. But this is something that people used to study. This is something that naturalists and biologists used to study. They used to know about this stuff. I had that same thought when I was going through it. I was just like, I don't know if I really want to do that because you're just thinking you're just going through this taxonomical listing of names. It's just this rote sort of memory. Well, that's the beginning part of it. But later on you get to some interesting things. So I've actually studied botany much more closely, and it's actually really interesting. Plants are actually fascinating how complex they work. And but this is just a fact, that plants use these defense chemicals to stop animals from eating them, and they can be extremely toxic and extremely harmful. So I want people to know that. I don't want doctors to be telling people to smoke because it's good for them, like 9 out of 10 doctors choose camel. Like that's not something that should be happening. People should be getting the right information.
And then
If they
they
want to
they
eat
are they are
vegetables, good
free
for
to
them.
choose. I mean,
Exactly,
as
exactly.
you said, you want to smoke, you want to drink alcohol. It's your life. You can do whatever you want, but at least
Yeah,
you know the truth. And then
yeah,
only if you know the truth, you're really, truly free to
yeah.
choose. That's it.
That's it. Yeah,
A very important question. Meat.
yeah.
Does it needs, no, let me repostulate it. Ruminant meat. Does
hmm
it need to be grass-fed?
Um, I mean, it's better. In certain ways. I mean, there are studies sort of looking at the differences between grass-fed and grain-finished, and depending on the markers they look at, they don't find too much appreciable difference. But I think if you get down to first principles, where that animal is eating what it's supposed to eat, and it's getting all the nutrients that it needs, and it's not getting things that are toxic for it, that it's going to be able to confer a better nutrition source to you without some low-level amount of toxins that can slip through. You can also look at the quality of fat content that's in grain finished versus grass finished beef. You start getting, as you grain finish beef, you start getting less and less omega 3s. You get more omega 6s, and that ratio of omega 3 to omega 6 is very important. You need both; they're both important. But if you get a lot more omega 6 than omega 3, that can actually break down into pro-inflammatory end products, and it can block out, because there's the same enzyme breaks processes omega 3s as omega 6. And so if you have an overabundance of omega 6, it'll actually just drown out the omega 3s, and you won't get any of the downstream products that you need from omega 3s. So after about 3 months of grain finishing a cow, you have basically trace amounts of omega 3s at all. So it actually really changes that complement of it as well. I think it would change other things as well. However, I think of it as the Olympics. Someone getting gold medal at the Olympics and someone getting silver medal at the Olympics. Okay, well, silver medal lost to gold, but silver also beat everyone else on Earth, right? And so while grain finished beef may not be as perfect as grass finished beef, it's still better than anything else you're going to eat on this earth. So if that's what you have access to, if that's what you can afford, you will be fine. The majority of meat that I eat is grain finished, and I feel fantastic. I've been doing this for a very long time. When I eat grass finished beef, and the thing is too, there could be a lot of trickery with labels as well. Just because you say something is 100% grass fed, all that sort of stuff, it's not necessarily. You have to really know where you're getting this from. But when I bought a 10-year-old cow, which actually the older the cow, the better. And I know in Italy, generally you'll eat older cows as well. It's much better flavor. And in America and Australia, you're eating yearlings, or two. In America, it's sort of 2 years. In Australia, it's only 1 year. So you basically, I mean, veal. And there's much less flavor. Where that older cow is much more beefy flavor. I think that's a higher concentration of those nutrients in that meat. And I needed much less of it, and I felt much better. I was just teeming with energy. I was just like, oh my God, I've never felt better. And so I do think that that's best.
Mhm.
But if you don't have access to it and you can't afford it, then grain finished is perfectly fine. The main thing is just eating meat and not eating all the other garbage, and just eating the meat that makes you feel good and that you can afford, and just enjoying your life.
Mm. What do you think about organs?
Um, they're fine. And if you're eating a mixed diet that's deplete in nutrients, that a standard Western diet is, or a plant-based diet is, organs are a great addition. to your diet because they're very densely packed with nutrients. When you're on just a strict carnivore diet, maybe at first to catch up with your nutrients, they can be a good idea, but eventually you get everything you need from the skeletal muscle, meat, and fat. I really don't eat organs, very, very rarely. I maybe had liver 3 times in the last decade, maybe. Yeah, I think 3 times. And so, it's, something like the Inuit, Eskimos from North America and Iceland, they don't really eat organs at all. They just eat the muscle meat
Ah.
of the seals and polar bear. Yeah, yeah. Well,
And they give
there's
the
a little
organs
different.
to the dogs, probably. They gave the
They feed the
organs to
organs
the
to the
dogs.
dogs. That's exactly it. Yeah, and Lewis and Clark was a famous expedition across America to chart Western America. They focused on fatty meat, and you can read their accounts. They would talk about the people that were it was fat was life out in the wilderness, and it was just like the ones who were eating. Who, if you didn't get enough fat, those were the people that were dying. And so they fed the leaner cuts and the organs. They fed those to the dogs, and they just went for the fattiest cuts possible. And so, adding in some liver every now and then is probably a good thing if it tastes good, and it makes you feel good. I don't think you need to eat it all the time. I think of it as being in proportion to the animal. First of all, the Inuit don't eat organs at all, right? So, they're not eating any. I don't eat any. I feel great. So you don't necessarily have to eat them at all. But if you're going to eat them, think of it in proportion to the animal. What are we doing? What would we be doing if we were hunting? We take down a deer or a buffalo, right? You kill that one buffalo, then you've got 2,000 pounds of meat on it. That's feeding you as an individual for the next 2 years. How
Wow.
many livers does it have, right?
Yeah.
It's just the one liver, right? So you're eating one liver over the course of 2 years, and really it's not going to preserve well. So you're just sort of eating that then, and then you're moving on with your life, and just eating the muscle meat from there on out. And so if you are going to eat organ meat, I would just do it in a thoughtful manner and not try
Moderation.
to overdo it.
Moderation. Okay.
Yeah, well, because the thing is that these things are nutrient dense, and therein lies the problem because they can have too much, and so you can get hypervitaminosis, meaning you can get a toxic level of certain vitamins, especially the fat soluble vitamins, because they don't clear from your system very fast, and so a toxic, vitamin toxicity is just as dangerous as vitamin deficiency. You need the right amount, and so you don't want to get too much or too little. And just to double back to your fruit and honey question, I don't do fruit and honey specifically because it has sugar. It will have the fruit will have some defense chemicals. They're not completely devoid of defense chemicals. Like all citrus have furanocoumarins, which are toxins, which your body has to detox, and it can cause harm. They get on your skin. They react to light, and they permanently bind proteins and DNA and damage your body. And you can actually get there are people that have gotten second-degree burns from getting lime juice on their hands in the sun, and so the defense chemicals do exist there. But also the sugar. The sugar is bad news. Sugar is sugar is sugar. It doesn't matter what the source is. All sources of sugar from fructose, they come from plants anyway, right? So you're saying, well, why is it better from this plant as opposed to that plant? I don't agree with that. Like fruit will have less defense chemicals if they're sweet, because most fruit will still kill you, right? Most fruits and
Yeah.
berries are toxic, in the world. Most of them will kill you. So the sweet ones we found are less toxic. That's why we recognize them as sweet. But that doesn't mean that they're completely non-toxic. And also the sugar causes harm. Sugar, fructose in particular, has been shown to be addictive and give a dopamine response to the addiction centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines. And they are broken down
Also
into the same
fructose.
product. Fructose, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So there are MRI studies that actually show that that people who eat a lot of fructose and sugar addicted actually break down and destroy the same areas of their brain as meth addicts, right?
Wow.
So to the same extent as meth addicts, okay,
Huh.
that's scary stuff. And fructose is then broken down in your liver into the same byproducts, into the same chemicals as ethanol, alcohol, right? And so you get damage from these byproducts. They're not healthy byproducts. They're actually bad for you. So you get fatty droplets, you get fatty liver disease, you get cirrhosis, you get diabetes, heart disease, and it's implicated in even things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, right? So this is bad. This is a bad substance, and maybe there's some stuff in the fruit that's sort of good for you. There's going to be stuff in vegetables that are good for you because it's a living thing and it has things that are good for living things. But that doesn't mean it's good for you, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't have other things
Yeah.
that aren't bad for you. And then honey. I mean, honey is bee vomit, and that's for food for the
I
bee.
never
We
thought
are
about
not
it.
really what it is. People say, "Oh, it's an animal product. It's like milk." Well, no, it's not exactly like milk. It's like cud. It's like a cow chewing cud and vomiting it up into its mouth, chewing it more, and then swallowing it. That's food for a cow. That is not food for you. I'm not going around, oh, get some cud here. Like, well, it's an animal product. Like, yeah, absolutely not. That needs to turn into the animal first before it's an animal product. And so honey is food for bees. There's going to be things in there that are, probably good for you because they're good for a certain subset of animal life. But fructose is not good for you. If you need to jack up your glucose and your insulin, or sorry, your glycogen, and you're starving, and you need to get a hit of energy and survive, go for it. I mean, then in that situation, it is very good for you. In a time where you have an abundance of food and energy available, it is not better for you. It's not good for you. Meat is going to be better for you. Meat is by far and away better for you. And so I don't think you need it. You certainly don't need it. There's no biochemical process in your body that requires fructose, exogenous fructose. And we make all the glucose that we need. We don't need to take it in. And so it's not necessary, and it can cause harm. And it's addictive, So some people
That's
will
the
be
thing.
fine eating
That's
fruit
the
and honey.
thing. It's fucking addictive.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
That's
And
the
so,
big, in my opinion,
yeah.
that's the biggest problem because, yeah, you can. I mean, I don't think that if you eat fruit once in a while, it can cause this big harm. No, if you are if you are healthy. But the problem is that when you eat that fruit, then you want to have more. At least this is
Mm.
how I work. So this is the biggest problem, in my opinion. Eggs,
Mm.
eggs.
Eggs are great. Yeah, eggs are great. So eggs are what's called a perfect protein because they not only have all the essential proteins, but they actually have the proteins in the right proportions that you need them. Because if you can get all the named proteins that you need that are essential proteins, but if you don't have them in the right ratios, then you're not going to make your proteins, your molecules that you need to. That's what these things are used for. These amino acids. You make proteins. Your DNA codes for proteins, and these proteins are molecules that have functions in and around your cells, and they're made out of stacks of amino acids. And so, if you don't have the right proportion of those amino acids, you're going to run out of some. And if you run out of one, even if you have an abundance of all the rest, you're not making anything. You get up to stacking in a lysine, but you're out of lysine. That stops. Production stops right there.
Yeah.
So eggs have a perfect complement of proteins and a perfect proportion of proteins as well. I think that chickens are also fed stuff that they aren't supposed to eat. They're not like ruminant animals like cows and things like that have all these different stomachs available, and they can really digest the hell out of things and detoxify things pretty well. So when they eat outside of their nature, it's not the end of the world. I think that's less so for monogastrics and poultry. So chickens, when they're eating just what they're supposed to eat, I think eggs will probably be fine for most people. But because of the chicken feed and things like, and cows or cows sometimes, but pigs and things like that are fed feed that they just would never encounter in the wild and can be quite damaging because they don't get detoxified properly, and so they can get into the pork. And so a lot of people actually have problems with pork, and some people have problems with eggs, especially egg whites. In particular, especially people with autoimmune issues, they really have to stick to red meat, really, and
To beef.
some really to
Beef.
beef and lamb and deer and things like that.
Ruminants,
Moose,
let's say.
ruminants, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and goats, whatever. If you can get moose, get moose. Moose is delicious. That's like the best tasting meat I've ever had. It's
Really?
awesome.
I
Oh, it's
never
so good.
tried. I have to
It's
try it.
amazing. It's
Really?
amazing. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing.
That's fine.
Absolutely love this.
But tell me something. Do you eat like just fatty cuts or do you add more fat to it?
Both. So if something's not fatty enough for me, I'll add fat. I'll like add like grass-fed butter or something like that, or grass-fed tallow. I'll cook something in a pan with a lot of tallow, and then I'll spoon over the tallow onto it. It actually helps with the browning and helps it sort of taste better, and it's all crispy and nice. And then afterwards, pour it over there, and all sizzles and everything like that. And you have that. You just sort of scoop up some fat with that. Like tonight, I just had some beef dipped in butter. It was like crab or lobster that you would like dip in butter. I did it with steak. It was delicious. And so yeah, you can do that. In Australia, they have really really taken it to heart that you should not eat fat. That fat's just a really bad idea. And so they've actually bred the cows to be more lean because that's the market. And then they strip off and trim off every ounce of fat. It is actually very difficult to get a proper cut of meat here that hasn't been trimmed to distraction. And so because of that, even like getting ribeyes, they're just so trimmed down
Really?
that, yeah, yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I've seen places they trimmed off the cap of the ribeye. It's like, that's not a ribeye. You've just ruined that cut of meat. Now it's like sirloin. Like, why buy it then, if you don't want the fat? And so I've started adding more fat. Like in America, I didn't have to. Say what you will about America. Oh my God, they eat so much fat. Good. That's the only thing keeping most of them together. It turns out. But you can get fattier cuts. Here it's more difficult, so I started adding butter to that. Yeah.
Butter or ghee? Like clarified butter.
So I'll cook in clarified butter,
Okay.
ghee, or tallow.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm adding like that to it, I'll actual butter. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with butter. Some people do. Some people have a problem with like the milk proteins, and casein especially is pretty pro-inflammatory, especially like A1 casein, but A2 is also pro-inflammatory as well. I don't have a problem with it. I do fine with it, and it tastes great. So, I like it, but not everybody can. And so if you're in that camp, then yeah, ghee is better. It removes the proteins. But just tallow. Tallow is fantastic. So grass-fed tallow is cheap, especially in America. You can get very cheap grass-fed tallow on Amazon. You can get like a big
Yeah.
5-liter bucket for
No,
like
here in
like
Italy,
$7 like
I,
that.
I just found a producer. So he raised grass-fed cows and grass-finished. He's the only one here in Italy. No, well, not the only
Yeah.
one, but one of the few that also tells you that the meat is grass-finished because we're a little bit behind in all this movement, okay? And so he's the first one producing tallow. So I just bought it and I want to taste it because I never tasted it. It seems crazy, but we don't have any more tallow. I'm sure that our grandmother they all cooked with tallow and lard because in the north of Italy we didn't
Absolutely.
have olive oil. So, but
And
now
that's the thing. And it's called the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet, people in Italy and
bullshit.
Greece, oh, it's olive oil and just plant-based, just eating pasta all the time. The hell, you know? It's meat
Bullshit.
and lard and tallow, and that's what it is. And, and a little bit of pasta,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, I'm sorry, like study history for God's sakes, that came over from China, like in the 1400s or something like that. Like that's not the traditional Mediterranean diet, that was a new addition, a few hundred years ago, but even the people that are eating that now, like, but traditionally it wasn't like a big, massive mound of pasta. That was never the thing. Oh, someone says tallow for lotion. I actually use tallow for lotion. I actually use that on my skin. It's the best lotion I've ever found.
I
Ever.
just bought it. I'm waiting for it to arrive in Holland
Yeah.
because I bought it in Holland. Nobody's doing the tallow for
Yeah.
cosmetics in
Well,
Italy.
well, but it doesn't need to be a cosmetic though. In fact, it's usually better if you don't, because a lot of the cosmetic will add a bunch of flavorings and scents and essential oils and
Ah,
plants, But if you just get tallow,
yeah.
just like normal ass tallow, like cooking tallow, you just put it on. It's great. It's
Doesn't
so
smell?
good.
No smell?
No,
No.
no, no, it doesn't
Okay.
smell. No, and if you put on a scent or something like that, it will take up that scent and hold it for the day.
Interesting.
And I use emu oil as well. That's really good because that's more liquidy, and so you can just sort of spread it more easily. Tallow sort of has to melt a bit.
Wow,
Um,
emu
but
oil. True. We don't have
yeah.
emu here, you know. We have ostrich sometimes, but emu.
Oh, ostrich oil. We get that. But emu, just tallow is amazing. Like I think tallow is better than emu oil. I really like tallow.
I look forward to try it. Really look forward. That tallow, because you know we really lost. The name is Italian is sego, but nobody, almost nobody knows what it is. Sego is the fat
Yeah,
of the cow, so it's
yeah,
like lard but made with the fat of the cow. And yeah,
yeah.
amazing. Anthony, I let me check if I asked you everything I wanted to ask you. Ah, no. Do you still have 5 minutes?
Sure.
Allora, because you know people they don't believe that. Okay, you told us about the pH of our stomach, which is the pH of a scavenger, but what I found fascinating is the nitrogen isotope
Mm,
analysis.
yeah.
Can you tell us about this, please?
Yeah, so this is very good scientific evidence showing what people and other animals ate throughout, the last several millions of years, um, and beyond. Any sort of fossil can do that. So it looks at stable nitrogen 15, which is a stable isotope of nitrogen, and it exists at a certain level in plants. Herbivores eat those plants, and they sequester some of that nitrogen 15, and so we can measure that, and we can say like, okay, these herbivores they build up this amount of nitrogen 15. Then predators that eat those herbivores, they have a higher concentration. They concentrate that nitrogen 15 again, sort of like in the food chain in the ocean. When I talk about like heavy metal poison, heavy metal, starts as this fish eats a smaller fish, and a bigger fish eats that fish, a bigger fish eats that fish, and a swordfish and a shark eats even more and more fish, and so you have this higher concentration of like mercury and things like that. So that's that's the same idea with nitrogen 15. And so you can actually delineate the entire food chain. So you can actually see who was eating what and you can stratify the food chain. And they
So
found
wait a
that
second, wait a second. The concentration of nitrogen 15
that's right.
determines where an animal stands on the food chain.
That's it.
Correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
correct. Yeah. Because, an animal that eats grass will
Mhm.
have X. Animal that eats that animal will have 2X thereabouts. It's not actually that, but and then animal that eats the animal that eats the animal that eats grass will have more as well, and it'll go on and on and on. And so they found that humans and our ancestors and Neanderthals and so on had a higher carnivore rating than other carnivores around, terrestrial carnivores around at the same time. So we had a higher carnivore rating than foxes, lions, wolves, bears, all the rest, probably because we were eating the foxes and the lions and the wolves and the bears and the saber-toothed cats and all these sorts of things. We were hunting them and fighting them and eating them as well. We were apex predators who dominated the landscape, which is why we are the most successful animal that's ever existed, besides maybe ants. I mean, ants are basically, they're on a different level, but we did not just scrape through the ice ages. Any species that is just barely making it by is not going to survive the ice ages. We thrived during the ice ages. We, you know, populated and grew and expanded and covered the entire globe during the ice ages. You know, we, traveled from Asia to North America during the ice ages.
Wow.
We were absolute masters of this planet long before telephones and airplanes existed, you
Wow.
know? And so we were eating all of these animals. So we really were apex predators, top of the food chain, right? We did not have natural predators. We ate other predators, right? Apex predators don't graze. Apex predators don't eat roughage. Great white sharks don't eat kelp for roughage, you know? And lions don't eat grass. So we have the stable isotope study. We looked at other populations as well. We looked at the mummified remains of people in ancient Egypt when they had agriculture. And they found, there we go, these guys were eating a whole bunch of grains, not a lot of meat.
So
They had horses eat.
these data are objective.
Yeah, it's purely objective. There's a certain level of nitrogen 15 and that's it. And you can actually tell, like, this is how much are in plants, this is how much of this is what they were eating. And so in ancient Egypt, we know from historical record that they were eating grains. This was the breadbasket of the ancient world, right? Other areas were for eating meat and things like that. And so, you know, they even looked at the different mummified remains of like different pharaohs. They found, oh wow, they have evidence of atherosclerosis. That must be because they were richer. They could eat meat. They could afford fatty things, not like, you know, the rest of the peasants or whatever. Actually, the peasantry and the normal people also mummified their remains. It's thought that there are more mummified remains in Egypt right now than living people currently in Egypt, right? So we have a lot of these examples. And the normal people, the regular people, were also getting atherosclerosis. And they were getting beer guts. And they were getting gynecomastia. Their statue showing this. Their statuary reflects the poor health and the obesity that was going through ancient Egypt. And they looked at what they ate. They ate grains predominantly. They were eating a lot of grains. And it wasn't, and they were getting atherosclerosis as well. And the pharaohs and the nobility maybe had better access to food and they got more of it, but they were eating the same thing. We've seen that in the stable isotope study as well.
I wanted to show the picture of the statue that you put on your presentation because, yeah, this one.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
You see?
Yeah, it's got man boobs. Now look at contrast that with the statuary of ancient Greece, right?
Wow.
You know,
Yes.
very different.
Very
you know,
different. Yeah, definitely.
the
And
statue of Pericles does not look like that. You know.
and now I will find it. And what about seafood or fish?
Yeah, it's totally fine. Yeah, you know, if people, some people have problems with shellfish, you know, but if you don't react to it, if it's not bad for you, if you're not, farmed fish again, like I'd stay away from it. They're feeding a bunch of grain and garbage that you don't want. They give them like little grain pellets and feed that will translate into a bunch of omega-6s and not very good nutrient density, but fish in general, fine. I mean, people do have a fear about. Yeah, there you go. And that's what people looked like. It's just that's so they were just representing bodies. And the yeah and the Egyptians were representing the bodies that they saw, which were not like that. So yeah, I mean, and there's a big difference. We read the Odyssey, you read the Iliad, you read the other great works of the classics. It was all about sacrificing a ram and an ox and a this and that. They just ate meat. They were eating meat. When Odysseus came back to Ithaca, it was all about all these suitors that they were taking down all the rams from the best herds, and they were taking it down, just decimating Odysseus's herds. It says every day they were getting the best from the herd, and they were having it on the spit, and they were roasting it up. They ate meat. That's the Mediterranean diet, a buttload of meat. And people who could afford it ate meat, and people who could not afford it had to flesh it out with plants and vegetables and grains because they were poor. But the wealthy people ate meat, and the wealthy people generally lived longer and in better health.
What do you think about olive oil? No.
Yeah, so it depends on when you catch it. If you ground it straight out, and started using it right then, that would be okay. It's not going to be as good as animal fat, And a lot of times, like olive oil, again in the Odyssey, they actually used that in their hair and on their skin, as opposed to on their food, you know. And talk about when Odysseus came out from the sea, and like the princess of the island or something like that found him, and he was able to wash himself. She gave him a big thing of olive oil. He dumped it over his head and put it through his hair, put it through his beard, and soaked on anointed himself with oils and all these sorts of things. They did a lot of that. So I'm sure they ate a lot of it as well. But when you fresh press it, it's it's in a better state than when you like leave it alone or when you cook with it. Because once oil gets out of the plant, it actually is a bit unstable and will break down into very pro-inflammatory things. There's a higher ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s than you want as well. There's different compilations and compositions of the fatty acids on there. But I think the main thing is that it breaks down into very pro-inflammatory, pro-oxidative byproducts. And so when you cook with olive oil or you cook with any plant oil, it breaks down much quicker because every 10 degrees Celsius that you increase a reaction, you double the reaction rate. And so if you go from 25 STP, standard temperature and pressure, up to 255 degrees Celsius, you'll increase the reaction rate and break down into these bad end products by 16 million times, right? So it's going 16 million times faster, right? So you are going to take that reaction to completion. So you should never, ever, ever cook with any sort of plant oils at all. If you're going to use olive oil, I would eat it
On a
fresh.
salad.
Like if you, yeah, on a salad. Well, I will need a salad, so
I tell you,
that's.
it's true. When you are on carnivore, you don't need olive oil. That's
No,
the
you
thing,
don't.
because
Yeah.
you don't need salad, because the only places I use olive oil is on raw vegetables. So yeah,
Yeah.
true. I never thought about it. And tell me something more. What do you think about supplementing with essential amino acid? Do you think we need it if we eat animal protein?
So essential amino acids will all be found in meat in
Yeah.
the proportion that you need them. So no, you don't need to supplement that. You don't need to supplement anything. Like, I mean, think about it this way: if you need to supplement, then by definition, you're not getting that from your food, right? You should be getting all your nutrients from your food. And so if you have to supplement, then your diet is deficient by definition, right? Meat is not deficient. Meat is what we are supposed to eat. It's what we're designed to eat. Koalas don't take supplements, right? And kangaroos don't take supplements. Deer don't take supplements because they're getting everything they need from their food, or they're dying, right? And so we should be able to do the same thing, and that's a testimony to the fact that this is what we're supposed to eat, because you don't need to supplement. If you're vegan, you have to supplement. You cannot even get a basic complement of nutrition. You're not going to get so many different vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, and many other things. You cannot get them. They don't exist. And so you have to supplement, which is another way we know we are not herbivores. We're not supposed to be eating this stuff, because the essential nutrients that we need don't exist in the plant or fungus kingdoms. You cannot get them, no matter what enzymes you have, no matter what biochemical processes you put them through. They don't exist. So you have to get them from animals who have the ability to make them, store them in
Grass.
their body, and then we eat that animal.
Yeah. What about cheese?
Cheese is okay. It's going to have things that are good for you, but it's not going to have complete nutrition like meat, right? Like fatty meat. And sometimes, like I said, the proteins in milk can be problematic for people. So
Okay.
some people don't do very well with that, and they get pro-inflammatory, or their skin will break out or something like that. So it's individual. It's also something that people find that they can sometimes put on weight, because you're sort of eating extra and your body doesn't necessarily want it. It still wants these other nutrients, so it's still telling you to eat the same amount of meat, and you're also getting cheese as well. So some people will stall their weight loss if they're eating cheese or eating dairy, or they'll even put on weight. And so it's just something to be mindful of. And so I think of dairy as a condiment to meat. I wouldn't, eat it just on its own.
Okay.
If I'm having meat and I'm melting cheese on it, then that's fine. But meat is the meal. That's where you get all your nutrients from.
Okay. What about cooking with pork fat versus tallow butter? May
They're
I,
both they're
may,
both great.
may I try to respond and you correct me?
Sure.
Okay. So the problem with pork, which is amazing, is that it's a monogastric animal. So if you find it that it is raised really free range, it's okay. Otherwise, it can be problematic because of what it eats, because it only have one stomach, like chicken or other. I don't know how you call it, volatili in English, like the
Poultry?
family of animal that flies, like chicken, for example.
Well, it was avian, but we would call it poultry if you're eating
Ah,
it. Yeah,
poultry,
poultry.
like duck and this, you call it
Duck
poultry.
and goose and turkey. So yeah, poultry. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. So, um, if you're getting grass-fed tallow, that's going to be very, very good. Lard is still going to be good, but it may have some of this stuff, depending on what the pig was eating, that yeah, didn't it isn't as optimal as the grass-fed tallow, right? So yeah, I would agree with that, but it's still very, very good. It's still a much better fat than basically any other fat that you're going to find. So also things like duck fat is really good. You can get goose fat as well, and those are great. You cook a steak in goose fat
yes.
and yeah, duck fat. Yeah, it's really good.
I have, I can ask you, do you know that in France, they give a lot of grains to duck and they make this fatty liver
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
super tasty, but I don't know if it's healthy.
Well, the fat's fine. You know,
You
the
think
foie
so? It's
gras is what you're,
okay?
you're
Foie
talking
gras,
about.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. It depends on what they're feeding them.
They feed them
But
grains.
grains, yeah.
Yes, of course. To
It's
make
gonna
a
have, it's
fatty
probably gonna have
liver,
something in there.
what's better than grains?
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing too, is saying it's like, oh, when you eat fat, you get a fatty liver. Like we do this to animals intentionally to give them a fatty liver, and you do that by giving them grains and sugar,
Yeah.
you know, and you marvel, you get, it's like, oh, fat makes you fat. It's like, well, when you feed a cow something to make it fat, you feed them grains. And to get Wagyu, you're feeding them a lot of grains, you're feeding them a lot of sugar, or they're feeding them beer, and they get very, very fatty muscles and things like that.
Mm.
So, it's we have clear examples, in front of us of these different processes, and yet oh no, that's different in humans. It's just, why would it be different? It's exactly the same biochemical processes, and so yeah, I mean, it's probably not as good as just eating the duck or the goose, when it's eating its normal diet, but the fat's good for you.
It's so
And
good, foie gras.
but yeah, I know it's probably not nice to the goose though. I
No,
think that's probably, you know, like
no.
before
There is a
we hear
guy
about
in
that, probably
Spain. There is a guy in Spain that makes foie gras grass fed. So he leaves the duck free. Yeah,
hmm
it's in Extremadura. I will find the name and I will send it to you. He's the only one in the
yeah.
world doing this. He's amazing.
Huh. I wonder how he
Yeah,
does it. Yeah,
he created an amazing environment for ducks, and they stops when they are migrating. It's crazy.
yeah.
And then he cut them at night. Really, it's beautiful. Yeah, I will
Mhm.
send it to you. Mm-mm.
Yeah, cool.
Sì, basta. Sorry.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sì, sì. E basta. I had a meeting at 2:30 and it's 3, so I really have to go. Because
Yeah,
I told
I should
him
probably leave as
I
well.
might be late. So,
Yeah.
and you close. Thank you. It was amazing. I
Yeah.
could stay here listening to you for hours.
Yeah, well, it was a pleasure to come on and speak to you about it. Hopefully, people found that interesting, and at least open their minds to different ways of seeing things, and maybe give it a try. So, if people want to learn more, I have a YouTube channel, just my name, Anthony Chafee, MD, and I have a lot of things on there. There's a playlist called Carnivore Starter Kit, and I think that there's a lot of videos on that I sort of curated onto there that I think are good to know about and good for people to watch if they're interested in getting started with that. So, and my podcast, The Plant Free MD, is also where you'll find those as well. And so, if people are interested in just learning more, just take a look and just keep an open mind. And don't just listen to me. Listen to other people. Listen to the vegan crazy people like Dean Ornish and Michael Greger. Make sure that I'm making sense. Make sure that my arguments aren't full of crap, and I'm not only seeing one side of the picture. See what they're saying, see what other people are saying, see what the opposing side is saying, and then make your own decision. For me, this was the clear choice, and I've really, really, really benefited from making that choice. And people around me, my friends and family, and my patients who have decided to go down this path, they've all benefited greatly. So, I wouldn't recommend this to my parents if I didn't really truly believe that this was the right way to go, because they are very, very dear to me. And so if I'm going to be, people ask in medicine, they say, think about this, you ask them a question, well, what would you do? What decision would you make? And I'm like, well, it's very difficult. It's for you. It was like, if this was your mother, what would you do? You're like, okay. And you try to answer for them. So, if this was my mother, I would tell her to just eat meat and only drink water, and that's it. And that is what I've told my mother, and that is what she's doing, and her health has improved dramatically, and so has my father's, and so have other people. So this is something I truly believe in. I truly believe that this is the right way for people to eat and will give us the best health long term and the longest and happiest lives. I truly believe that. And so I hope that more and more people come across this and learn about it, and at least think about it and try it for themselves to see if it works for them.
You're amazing. Thanks for everything you do, really, because I strongly advise everybody to go on Anthony YouTube channel and watch the video, because we spoke about a little bit of it today, but he has a wonderful video, Why We Are Carnivores. It's fantastic. Bravo.
Good. Well, thank you.
Thank
you
you.
very much. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah,
Ciao.
you're very welcome.
Ciao, Anthony.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Ciao.